Thinking of starting a business in 2025? Well, maybe avoid these. As a business accountant, my team and I spend all day long helping business owners on their journey. And of course, right at the start, we get involved. And we've seen lots of businesses, thousands in fact, over the years, have gone through this process of starting up. And then we get to see how long they go for. How long does it last? And this time of year, particularly when a lot of people are looking to start up businesses, I wanted to do a bit of a video on what's actually the worst businesses. And I say worse, and I'm going to define that and to say that the ones that made this list are ones that you just do not see high success rates. In fact, if someone tells me they're going to start them, I normally look at them and think, are you sure? It's that kind of strong because the success rate is so low. And I think you'll be surprised actually by a couple of them in the list, because there are plenty of YouTube videos out there telling you to go and start these businesses because they'd be great as a side hustle and great for long-term wealth creation. And one particularly is good for long-term wealth creation, but the actual success rate is very low. So it'd be interesting to get into those. So before we get into the detail of the video, if you do like these videos, make sure to click the subscribe button and the bell below so you get notified whenever we release more videos just like this one. Now, when I was looking at what businesses did I want to include in this video, honestly, it was not difficult. I wrote them down in 2 seconds, but if I tell you a little bit about the reasons why, I'll go into detail in each one, but generally to make this list, they had to be businesses where I'd be like, lots of people want to start them. We see a lot of them and we see that the success rate is very low, yet they're advertised quite often as, you don't need a lot of cash, you can do it as a side hustle, it's easy to get money, they're easily profitable, and it's just passive income. And passive is such a funny term to me as a small business owner and somebody that just sees these business models day in, day out, and what the reality of that really looks like. So that's where they've made the list, is they're in that kind of zone. So the first business I'm going to talk about is a combination of businesses, and it's in that e-commerce world, and that's going to be things to do with Amazon. So that's normally you will hear things like FBA or drop shipping. I would also throw in there print on demand as well. There are all these ideas that you can, do a couple of things, lob them up on Amazon, and then you'll start creating some money. And that's absolutely possible. And with all of these ones I'm talking about today, we work with people who have done this successfully. So that you absolutely can do these things, but they are a tiny proportion of the businesses we see that make this successful. So the reason this is particularly difficult, I think, at the moment is a few different reasons, but one is that it's a massively crowded space. Lots of people are doing it, and you've got some big players in there, particularly foreign entities in other parts of the world that can just absolutely destroy you on price. And it's it's quite a product-driven world, isn't it, Amazon? So when we see these people trying to compete with there, the actual profit margins you make after all the costs are really small, and you have to sell high volumes, so quite a lot of the product to actually make any money to pay yourself. And there's always more costs than you think. You might even do the maths, and if you've looked at any of our startup content that we've recorded over the years, you'll see me talking about this idea of really understand your model. And if you went and did it, you'd probably still miss costs that you wouldn't have considered. And particularly with something like Fulfilled by Amazon, the FBAs, there's always other costs in there that people don't factor in. And actually you make such a tiny percent, you have to sell so much that it really doesn't make it sustainable for most people. So for the majority of people, they leave. And in our world, we see a lot of people who've left quite well-paid jobs to go and do this and then get a real shock. You only have to look at some of our YouTube comments and comments across social media to see people sharing this type of experience with you. So if this is you and you're thinking of doing one of these businesses, by all means, I would never discourage anybody from going to go and do a business, but just think about it as what can I risk? Am I okay with this not failing? I would always say to people, don't drop everything to try and do this full time. Test the market, see if it's going to work for you. And we've also seen that there's patterns. You can be highly successful for a period and then the algorithm changes or the demand for your products disappears or somebody's done it better than you and it can all just vanish almost overnight. And it's pretty scary, I think. The other thing with this model is it's not as easy, quick cash as people think, because you have to have quite a lot of money of startup inventory. There's normally a time delay if you're going to order that and get it delivered. Then you've actually got to get that money from the different payment sources after all your costs. You're probably going to need then to somehow use that cash to buy the next bunch of stock. And it's very difficult to actually see any sort of cash, particularly in those startup months. So just know it's a really difficult business, low margins, and I think a lot of stress for people. But as I said, there are people that do it successfully, but do not get kind of, I don't say conned, it's a bit of a strong word, but it's that sort of idea when you see these YouTube videos telling you to start these things up, it's really easy passive income, because it is really not from what we see with our work with clients. So that would be the first one, FBA, Amazon, and that kind of drop shipping world. Now the second one, and this is absolutely going to be a shock, I'm sure, is I'm going to say property businesses. Now you might think that's crazy, Dan. Like I hear so many people who have created long-term wealth. You can see the money in property And it's absolutely true. I've worked with lots of very successful people in the property world. I wouldn't discourage you from having property. I have property interests. I'm not saying they're a bad thing to get into, but there is a particular type of business owner that I want to talk about, and that's more like a startup property business. And we see a lot of people where they've spent multiple thousands of pounds to go on a property course to learn to be a property guru. And then they've spent all that thousands, they've got zero money left, and then they want to start a property business. And they'll come in and they'll say, Dan or my team, look, I want to start up. I've been told I need a holding company and a limited company for this and a limited company for that. It's normally like at least 3 limited companies. All of those companies are going to have ongoing costs. And normally they're taught these models of what's known as rent to rent or property sourcing, that the idea is that you can do this with no money down because you're going to go to landlords and ask to rent their properties for them for a cut, or you're going to say, actually, I'm going to go and package deals up to sell to investors and all this kind of stuff. And again, yes, there are people that have done this successfully, but I have yet to see or worked with, and as one property company in all the years where actually somebody has successfully made deal sourcing work. So it is very, very fine margins, and we see lots and lots of people involved with property. So again, it's definitely doable, but if you're being sold this dream, you've got to work out how much are you willing to put in, what's the effort. And of course, most of these courses are surrounded by, expensive support networks or ongoing coaching fees or whatever the case may be, and it does drain all the money. So I think the key here is if you're going to get into property, where we see the most success is we see it with people that have waited, they've got money behind them, and then they're going to come into this market well researched and with a bit of buying power, and then they see those long-term rewards. We're just not seeing these, it's quite often people who just want to change their life. And I totally get it. You've seen these videos, you can see the wealth that property can bring, and you want to make that jump. But without decent money behind you, we just do not see a successful rate of people carrying on that. Most of them end up back in employment, trying to pay off the fees they've spent trying to do this and things like that. So property business is absolutely be on that list of, consider whether it's right now to start. Might not be a no never, but certainly it might be you're looking at going, do you know what? Actually, yeah, I'm safe for doing X, Y, and Z and building some capital, some money to put into it later. Now, the third one's a little bit generic, but it's like a group, I suppose, of companies and businesses we see people starting that just don't succeed. And you hear people say all the time, you've got to be passionate about what you do. And I don't necessarily think that's true, but it definitely helps. But what you do need is knowledge. You need to understand how the business works. And what we see people who have always had this idea they want to be a business owner. So maybe they go and buy themselves a franchise, or they go and buy themselves a business that's supposedly established, and then they try and run it. And the success rate for those we see, again, is tiny. And the reasons a lot of the time is that the owner really doesn't enjoy that business. They don't like the reality of being in business and having to run it. And if it's established, deal with people and team members and all the cash flow headaches and worries that goes with that. And if they're starting up with, say, a franchise, there's a lot of fees and things that go in, and there's all that initial excitement. And then it's like, well, I've got to pay this franchise for every month, and I've got to buy from them, and it's getting really tough. And again, we don't see a high success rate with those. And I think there's a couple of key elements for why. The first one is this idea that, they don't actually enjoy the business they want. They've seen it marketed and thought it's a great idea. I'm going to be an estate agent today. I'm going to be a printer. I'm going to be whatever the different franchise option might be. And we're not talking about a McDonald's or a Subway or some of those bigger ones, because, we do see more successes with those. But these smaller franchises, they tend to they're not necessarily loving the business, but more than that, they don't necessarily understand or have the skills to really understand how to make that work well, how to explain the benefits passionately to a customer or a prospect, particularly in the early days. You're playing with established players in the market. You've got to be able to kind of go in there and really explain why you'd be different, or at least sometimes you're just selling on passion, and people understand that. And if you don't have it, it's really challenging. And then when the times do get tough, and small business owners who've been in business a long time will tell you, there's a lot of hours to put in on occasion. And sometimes you just don't have it in the tank. You're just not that infused about it, and that can have problems. And then if you have bought something slightly more established where you've got team members, those team members might be the only people that technically know how to do the thing, and you're reliant on them. And that's a dangerous, vulnerable place to be in. Now, I think most business owners who start a business start the thing themselves, and then they'll bring in experts. There's areas of tax and things like that where we've got some specialists in the building, for example. But I know a lot about a lot of things. And in our business, anybody could leave tomorrow and I would be able to do it. I might not be able to do it 100% as well as them, but I could do it. And I have a real in-depth knowledge of it. And we see this with a lot of successful owners we work with, is they can do that as well. They're not exposed then to this vulnerability of having to work with someone they really don't like, or is detrimental to the rest of their team because they're the only person that knows how to do X or Y. So it's a real issue sometimes. So we see that being a real challenge for people if they've not got the passion, or they really don't understand how to do it technically, or they just don't know how to do it. So for example, I've seen franchises where we're selling website redevelopment, yet the person selling it doesn't understand how a website works really, not at like a detailed level enough to be able to really understand when people are talking to them on technical jargon, and they're relying on a back office centralized team. So they're almost like a salesperson, and it just doesn't work very well. We don't see high success rates. So again, if this is you're sitting there in the new year and thinking, okay, look, I want to go and buy a franchise, I want to do this. Where we do see really good success is if you've been in that sector. So if you're already in, say, website development, and you see a really cool franchise that's in website development, I'm just making these things up, then you've probably got a really good chance of doing it. You might, maybe that support network from them and all the extra they bring to the table with the franchise fee you'll be paying them is going to help, get to customers quicker and get to those people quicker. And great, it's like people who set up these restaurants like your McDonald's and your Subway, you're buying a brand, aren't you? And it's presumably, and just generally, really going to help you get customers through the door because people know what they're getting. But in these smaller franchises, sometimes that's not always the case. So just consider about, is this franchise for me? Is this business that I'm buying, if it's an established one, actually work? Is it what I want to be doing long term before getting into that? Because what we see a lot is that people just put in their life savings or borrow a load of money, and then it all collapses on top of them and they wish they'd never done it. And it happens far too often. It doesn't matter how many times we share these experiences, because we don't want to, we want that enthusiasm at the beginning, but we will talk about reality if someone asks us. And that's why I wanted to come on and do this video is, just be really conscious about what you're doing with that, because it has to be right. Now, again, as I said, if you've come out of the employed world, so we see a lot of success where someone's come out of the employed world and then they have already got the contacts, already passionate in that space, they understand it really well because they've had a lifetime of working experience on it, and they'll come out and pick up a franchise and establish business and do really, really well at it. So that's very common. Like the most successful people we see in small businesses are those actually that have spent a long time in the sector working and then decided to go out on their own because they've got a slightly new twist and they really understand the market they're in. So there is absolutely successes for all this. And there's still successes for people that aren't necessarily passionate about the business, because you might really get the model right. And then actually you don't need to work all these hours, you don't need to put the extra effort in, and it works out really well for you. But again, you're talking about a very small sliver of small businesses. The majority by far are in the other side of it. So there we are. So there's kind of 3 pseudo businesses that you should think about not starting, or if you are going to start them, really understand and really look and really consider whether these are right for you. Now, I am going to do another video talking about 3 kind of styles of businesses we see a lot of success from, so you can get some more positive spin in it. But I think this one was an important one to do as we get inquiries again for this type of thing moving forward. It's a good one to kind of be able to link and say to people, look, these are my thoughts on it. Think about these things just before you get involved with it. So there we go. If you have had any experiences with these type of businesses, do stick them below in the comments. I'd love to hear from you, and share it with the world so people can see it's not just me spouting these things. These are real lived experiences for a lot of people. Until next time, share it with anybody you think needs to know this information, and I'll see you there.